and I'm really happy I got the invitation to present in the Experio seminars. I've worked closely with colleagues in Oslo who worked at Experio Lab. So I've only heard amazing things about Experio Lab, and when I looked at the previous people you've had presenting at the seminars, I was of course really starstruck, I must say. Like Johan Redström has been a mentor for me during my PhD, and Ramia is someone I look up to a lot and has been inspired by with her feminist research for many years. So I was really glad to get the invitation and the opportunity to share my work and have great conversations with you. So thank you for that, and thanks also for hosting and moderating the conversation here and the seminar later today. So before I start, yeah, just a very brief introduction to myself. I'm Louise. I sit in Oslo now. I'm from Denmark, where I grew up. I did my PhD. I did a PhD in interaction design. Um, Finished it already 8 years ago now, I think it is, at Aarhus University. And my PhD was on critical feminist design of intimate technologies for women's health areas. And some of you might know the work that I've been doing around like thinking about this phrasing, staying with the trouble from Donna Haraway, in what way we can use that through design practice. I'm not going to talk so much about that today, but that's where a lot of my work that's where it comes from. Um, then after my PhD, I've been in Stockholm doing a postdoc at KTH in Stockholm, where I worked in the incredible interaction design group in a team called Digital Women's Health, with some really fantastic people. And some of the work that I present here today is also from working in that group with Madeleine Balaam and Mai Siolfi and Nadia Campo-Wojtok. And then the last piece of work that I present today is work that I did after I moved to Oslo. So I moved to Oslo in Norway to do a second postdoc at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design, um, where I was lucky to work with Justina Wink, who's been a Experio member as well. And there I got to develop my work, specifically focusing on still femtech, but particularly focusing on marginalized communities and sustainability. So that's some of the work I will present today is also work that comes from that phase of my researcher journey. Now I introduced myself earlier as independent researcher and designer. That's because I just came back from maternity leave actually. I had a cute little human last year and have been taking good care of that for the last year. And now I actually just started a new career journey in a startup here in Oslo, in a med tech startup. So that is extremely exciting and interesting to think about how I can actually translate and use my 10 years of research in a industry domain. So or setting. So that's super exciting and curious to talk more about that as well, perhaps. But today, well, let me just start this one. Today, I'm going to talk about feminist design of femtech, and it will be around feminist design practices, and then femtech, like this field or area of technology, right? Designing for women's health. And I will throughout my seminar discuss a little bit about why does it make sense or how does it make sense to have a particularly feminist perspective or feminist agenda within this bigger space of femtech development. I will show some different strategies or tactics and examples of design projects that I've done myself. So, coming to this presentation, zooming in or listening into it, there are a few questions that you could ask yourself in your interest in joining the talk, or so it could be, are you a designer? Are people designers here? Is that the interest they come to with the talk? Are you a feminist? Are you a health practitioner? Are you interested in the domain of femtech? So these are some questions that we can start opening up to like frame the motivation or intention with going into this talk. And a question that have asked often when I present it is this question: Are you a feminist? And I'm not going to ask you to like raise your hand or anything, but it's an interesting one to consider when moving into this methodology of feminist design. So when I was asked this question first time, it was more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, perhaps. It was in a presentation by Ina Shevchenko, who's the leader of the Femin. And I remember back then, it was like 15 years ago, I was really hesitant to raise my hand. And in this room, you could feel like a hesitance to use this word. And I think still today, when you are in a research space and also in some industry context, it's still something that's a little bit of a touchy subject, whether you want to use the word feminist in presenting your work, but it's something that I do quite deliberately. Um, so Femin is a movement, a feminist movement. It's global, it's worldwide, but it originates in Ukraine. And this is some of the some pictures from some of the recent or throughout the last few years demonstrations against the war. So this is one way of thinking about feminism of and also of our bodies, and it's also a way of a little bit anchoring this talk in some of the troubles and issues of today's world. So what we see here is people, female bodies who are using their bodies, right, as like a political tool as well. So I'll slowly go into talking about, okay, so then what is feminism? And feminism is many things, right? It's a theoretical world, like it's a theory, it's a political movement, it's also action, it's practices. This is from pop culture. It's Beyonce in 2013 who sampled a speech where it's said that it's from award-winning Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who says, um, feminist, a person who believes in the social, political, and economical equality of the sexes. So this, yes, feminism, like it has a legacy where it comes from gender equality, right? And this is one way throughout history that it has been very much talked about in terms of gender or equality of the sexes, as it says here. But feminism has also developed to be a wide variety and things, and people have used, for instance, waves to express in what like first, second, third, fourth waist feminism. What is that? But there's a lot of different kinds of feminisms. So when I in my title also write feminist design, I will try to like throughout my presentation with the specific projects be a little bit explicit about, okay, what kind of feminism is manifested in this project? Or how can you see also the practice, the design practice that I present evolving throughout, I guess, a nuanced version of what feminist design means? Because it's not only about gender. And I think this is very important in general in design, but also in particular if you talk about femtech, because it has in its sort of like definition of this kind of technology something that is in some way sticking to gender. But if we think of feminism as something different, broader, more specific in terms of different feminist movement, we get further than only thinking about femtech in terms of women. So we have within like understandings of intersectional feminism, Black feminism have been very outspoken and clear about. Feminism is not only about gender. So intersectionality, it's a term that Kimberly Crenshaw started using to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems, like racism and sexism, are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice. So here it's a way of starting to think, okay, we have intersectionality, we have perhaps sexism, we have racism, we can have ableism, we can have classism. These are all different intersections that in feminism you start to layer and understand the deepening complexity of oppression, right? So if we talk about design and feminism, in this could be one way of thinking about what is that. It could be how design practices are supporting and reproducing these systems of oppression and how we use design practices to challenge them. So I would say if we have a normative design practice, most likely you are reproducing norms of oppression. And if you don't take a specific like design feminist attention towards that, you will reproduce oppressions in the world. So feminism for me is then how do we use our design practice to actively challenge these, create alternatives to these, or basically, yeah, like counteracting them, challenges the status quo, abolishing the oppressions, right? So there was a this book many of you might know, have read, perhaps the Feminist Designer book. It came out, I believe, was it last year or the year before at MIT Press. Incredible, I must say. MIT Press publishing a book called Feminist Designer. This is a collection of essays, interviews, texts written by different designers and researchers who all have some kind of feminist perspective in their work. And is a collection of people who wrote it, which is very important because it's not like there's one way of practicing feminist design. Everyone brings their multi-layered um, perspective to what it is. And I had a chapter in this book called On Staying with the Trouble of Future Technologies, where I try to like write out how feminism matters in the design of the technologies, particularly in technology areas. So this was a very important book, very interesting one. And I would say it moves the design field, the discipline, as well as design education, a step forward in how we think about feminist design practices. So what we sometimes see, these are other kinds of way that design practice think of something that could be along the line of feminism, but without using that word feminism. So we have these are all based out of work that's being done here in Oslo, where I'm situated. We have frameworks such as inclusive design, um, where different tools and methods are being presented to be more inclusive in your design practice. Then we have a framework also from designer, Do No Harm, which is specifically also focusing along the line of like how can we do least harm in our practice. And then there is by X. This is just one example of a project from their portfolio where they did a labor induction kit. But the reason why I bring it here is because it says design for women by women. So this is like one way that we often see in the design discipline across research practice. Something along the lines of gender coming into the picture, something being designed for women by women. And of course, this is really important when you think of design practice, history, research, which has historically been very male dominated, right? So this is one way that people have tried to like challenge that status quo of a male dominated industry by really pushing forward this idea or this fact or this strategy of designing by women. One thing that is sort of like a little present in these examples is this um, general attention towards diversity, equity, inclusion. So those are words that sounds fantastic. These are words that most of us, not everywhere, definitely not in the US, might like, but it's like the idea of like, yeah, we want more diversity, we want equity or equality, we want people to be included. That sounds wonderful here in the Nordic countries, at least. That is like, that's something we can all sort of say yes to. We want more of that. Um, what I learned when I was working at AHO, actually, in Oslo, is that we might need to have a shift from talking about these like glossy words towards talking about oppression, discrimination, and inclusion. These are words that are already more, they're more troubling, right? They bring forward the issues, the problematics, and address that in the process. This is something that I learned from expert Tess Skadegaard Thorsen, who's a fantastic gender researcher and who leads initiative for anti-racist feminist initiatives within the creative industry. And we did have a DEI initiative at AHO, and she came in as an expert and told us you need to start shifting your language. So you actually talk about the issues and not talk about these like beautiful, glossy, let's be in harmony words. So this is one, I guess, prompt or provocation to many people is how can we start in nailing the issues, or how can we start talking about the issues that is actually that we are facing? So this is one way of starting to phrase what is a feminist practice. And with that, I pose the first question, and I'll pose a few 5 questions for reflection. So you don't have to answer these now, but you can start reflecting upon them, and you're welcome to start writing um, some answers to this in the chat, or just note it down for yourself on a piece of paper. And then perhaps we can return to it in our conversation after the presentation. So the first question that I have is like, what is a feminist design practice for you? Very open question, but it's just a way to start to make you think, okay, what is it for me? What do I intentionally, what do I bring into this practice when I say feminist design? Because I think it can be so many different things. So that was the first sort of chapter of this presentation. Now I go a bit more into the area domain and of femtech, of which is very much the domain of my research. And I think the domain that I'm actually the reason that I went into research. So I saw when I was doing my design education, I started seeing this kind of movement, you can almost say, of new kinds of technologies, new kinds of design that came into the world, which haven't been there for decades. So there's been very, very little innovation, very, very little research within this area called women's health, right? It has been underfunded, ignored, deprioritized, generally stigmatized and tabooed. But 10, 15 years ago, we started seeing more and more examples popping up. So the reason that I actually went into research was my interest, my passion in these topics that are related to women's health. An interest and passion about it, but also a slight discomfort with the way that I saw these designs being made. So there was both something that really attracted me to it, and there was something that I couldn't quite grasp at the time that also made me a little bit thinking that, oh, this could be done different, or this could be done better. Um, but generally, these are like examples of femtech. So femtech is a domain of or area of technology development. It was coined, this femtech was coined as a term in 2016 by the Clue founder, Ida Tin. She's Danish, and she designed this and built this period tracker, menstrual cycle tracker app, Clue, which is one of the most used period trackers in the world. And she coined this term femtech to sort of put on the map that here is a area of technology development that we need to do more of. It's necessary for half at least half of the population. And she experienced when she started building her startup that a lot of people were uncomfortable talking about women's health. So that's also why she actually created this term in order to have a language for this kind of category of technology. So femtech, in some cases, this is short for female technology, which I'm not the biggest fan of, you could say actually. Some people describe it as technology for women's health and well-being. This is a way of phrasing it that brings the user back to a woman. So that's why some people have stopped also using this kind of term because it's tech yes, it's a technology that are used in mo many cases for female physiology, but that doesn't mean that it's for a woman. So that's why a new phrasing of it is technology addressing needs of people with female biology. Other people use it if, for instance, you're using making a menstrual tracking app, use technology addressing menstruators or people with menstrual cycles. This is a way of phrasing technology, not in terms of women, but in terms of the people who actually have the need and the interest in using this, because we have people who are menstruating who are non-binary or who are trans men. So this is a gender inclusive way of talking about these kinds of technologies. Then some people, there's a quite interesting um, venture studio called Dia in Gothenburg, I think it is in Sweden. They have started talking about femtech, both in terms of this physiological element, physiological health element, but also a contextual element. So a contextual understanding of health which doesn't reside in your body or your physiological experience, but contextual elements that happens to discriminate against women or people with female bodies. Then the last point of this slide is this a niche? This is something that I have met many times, and many people who work within the fintech domain. There's a lot of people thinking this is a niche. And calling it a niche is a way of devaluing it. Because 50% of the population should not be called a niche user group, right? So this is just to bring it in and say, no, it's not a niche. Here are some examples of what these kind of health and well-being areas could be, but these are just a start. Menstrual cycles, menopause, pregnancy, fertility, breastfeeding, other aspects related to breast could be breast cancer, postpartum care. Endometriosis is something that is much more talked about and put focus on the last few years. So that's incredible. Pelvic floor, abortion. Um, these are some of them. And I think the femtech really started out around menstrual cycles. So that was in year 2015 was actually the year I started my PhD. And 2015 was also the year of the menstruation or the year of the period or something. It was coined by, I think it was the New York Times or another big newspaper. It was really an important year in terms of menstrual health. It started becoming much more something people were talking about. There was much more attention to that. This is actually a really important part of people's lives that is being just hidden. People have had to conceal it, to hide it, to fit in to society. So these are some examples of femtech, and I think there's many more. So my second question for reflection is, what other areas of women's health are necessary to design for? These might be experiences that people have had lived experiences. It could be experiences of people in the close circles or in a further out circles on societal level. Um, Areas of women's health or reproductive health, sexual health that are necessary to design for. Um, before I start going a little bit deeper into my own projects, I wanted to add these few risks of femtech. And these are risks that I've sort of seen coming up through analysis, you could say, through being involved in different research projects that has to do with femtech and through continuously analyzing and digging into the products and services that exists on the market. So some of these risks are the first one I wrote, medicalizing the body and framing people as patients. This one comes into picture when we think of health and well-being and areas of, for instance, menstrual health or reproductive health that are in some way natural or mundane experiences, that there is a risk if we start medicalizing them and if we think people as patients in these areas of life. Then the second risk is I've written down here promoting disembodiment through datafication. And this is a risk that comes into pitch play when we think of technologies and the self-tracking movement and the data gathering of technologies, that there is a risk when we start sort of using technologies in these embodied lived experiences that they can promote a distancing to the body. And then the third risk that I highlighted here is the individualizing and privatizing of health. And this one is in many cases, femtech are designed for individual users, right? Um, and in many cases, they are designed in a way on a business model. And these health areas are often very social. They are very anchored in the context, in communities, in families, and they are not necessarily to be paired with like a privatized business model that tries earning money on these public mundane health areas. So this is a third attention that is important to consider. Then the last risk is that the femtech can risk perpetuating a normative version of a woman user. So this is the thing, if you only think about you're designing these technologies for women, you're gonna design it for a certain kind of women user, the most likely most privileged woman user. And by doing that, you are gonna ignore um, actually, I mean, I guess all the users that are oppressed in ways, for instance, that a white rich woman is not. So with that said, I'm gonna go to this one. So these risks, I believe perhaps possibly there's many more risks, and this could be another question for reflection as other risks that should be attended to. And I'm with the risks, I'm not saying that all femtech is doing this, definitely not. I'm just highlighting it as something that I think if you are in the area of femtech, these are things that you should carefully consider and reflect upon when you're designing, because otherwise these are pitfalls that you might end up with. So then, for this presentation, I would like to propose these three strategies for feminist design of femtech, and I'm going to go through each of them in more detail. But the first one is around embodiment, um, being in the lived body, and the second one is around community, and the third one is around ecology. And my hope for these is that they can bring something new or something different into the area of femtech. I'm going to present them in a way so they all are kind of aligned with feminist ways of living, you could say, or feminist theorizing, that are incredibly relevant when it comes to femtech. And hopefully, I mean, hopefully for me, it's will bring new opportunities to designing better femtech. So the first one is creating embodiment and body literacy through curiosity. I guess this is perhaps the easiest strategy to start building into technology work. So what I mean about this one is thinking about embodiment, body literacy. How can we design technologies that brings people into a closer relation with their bodies? So this work that I'll present here is very inspired by actually the work that I did at KTH in Stockholm, where there is the group called Soma Design or Soma Aesthetic Design. It's a way of thinking about the body in a non-dualist way, where the mind and the body is one. So often when we design, it's for mental models, it's for the mind. Often we are designing for the mind, or we are designing for the body. But most case technology development throughout history, it has just been designed for I guess the eyes and the brain and touching with your fingers or typing with your fingers. So the thinking of soma design is a way of designing for the whole body and the body and mind as one. Um, this way of thinking about the body is in some way it's prioritizing the body. It's valuing the body, is valuing emotions. And this comes from a feminist tradition as well. We have, like in feminism, there's been this critique of the hierarchy between mind and body, uh, or between rationality and emotions. And this way of designing is kind of breaking down these hierarchies where one has been more attached to the male, to a male gender. So what this first strategy tries to do then is to question these dualisms, um, and move beyond typical mind screen-based technology into the space of the body. So the work that I want to share with you here is Menac Bits. I'm gonna go a little quickly over it, but it's the work that I did with my team in Stockholm back in, yeah, 5 years ago already. Wow. So here we designed a prototyping toolkit called Menac Bits, and it consists of different heat elements and soft silicone actuators, programmable soft robotics, um, different heat and shape-changing elements that can be programmed and electronically controlled. So it was a prototyping kit where we designed these elements to be worn on the body. So I would created an open-ended set of tools for exploration where people could take part in the process themselves of designing technologies they would like to put on their body. And this was all in the space of menarche. And menarche is the onset of menstruation. So this is the space or the time in the life as an adolescent or teenager when you have your first period. A very transformative time in your life. A lot is happening, and a lot is happening in the body when you start menstruating. And what I tried to do with this work was to really move from thinking of menstruation as something only physiological, something you can read about in a textbook, towards bringing the attention to the body, their feelings of the body. How does it feel to start to menstruate? What's the pains? What are the anguished feelings? So, these different elements, they go in and they touch the body. They create massage, they create heat, they create a sort of like this curious exploration. How does my body feel when this technology becomes one with it? In the project, I collaborated with a high school in Stockholm at Solna High School, and they're elite athletes. So they were all sports athletes, the people I collaborated with. They were young sports athletes. They had a very, the way that they were using their body in sports meant that they always wanted to be better, 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 more and more progress. So menstruation is kind of a conflict in this way of thinking of the body as something linear that gets better because menstruation is it's cyclical. But it was really interesting in workshops. In workshop we explored this prototyping toolkit, and I asked them to design technologies that they would like throughout their menstrual cycle. So some of the examples were heat components you could put on your pelvic area, on your abdominal area to give you massage, or inflatable bits that you could put on your chest to help you calm down if you feel anxiety and depression in the days before starting to bleed. So that was the first project that I wanted to present to you. And with that, I want to ask this question for reflection. How do we invite curious interactions with the body? Yes. Wow, time flies. I need to speed up a little bit. Great. So the second point is nurturing community of care through gathering. And here I really try to bring us away from only an individualized understanding of health into a community of care. And think about these areas of health that are stigmatized and intimate, and a lot of people talk about them as private. Think about them as something that exists as in a community that affects the community. A lot of people also have the experiences. So this is a different way of thinking of feminism that is more intersectional. It is something that is more think about like the different ways that people exist in connection with each other with their various markers of identity, various markers of discrimination. Thinking also of the body in one of the projects I present in terms of critical disability studies. So this way of thinking is also something that thinks that tackles healthcare beyond the individual, but also beyond the hospital within communities. So the first project I'll quickly go through is make your own vibrator. It's a workshops I hosted where people were invited to make their own sex toy. And it was incredibly interesting how people came together in a workshop to design vibrators to make something physically, and through that start talking about what kind of sexual desires people have. So I brought a bunch of small plastic pebbles that can easily be heated up and transformed and molded and change color. And then people would use electronic elements, very simple electronic elements, to incorporate batteries and switches and vibrators into this material. So here we start seeing, okay, a very intimate and some people say private or personal health topic being explored and understood and cared for in a community. The second project that I will bring in is actually the most recent project that I've done in my research, which is not something that I've been publishing about, but it's a project called Pleasure During Rehabilitation. And it was a project that I did in collaboration with Sunna's Rehabilitation Hospital, a hospital in Oslo that work with different patient groups. But the group I worked with and the people that I collaborated with was in the spinal cord injury group. Researchers there, nurses there, physiotherapists, who all work with people who have a spinal cord injury. And the reason I started collaborating with the hospital was that they know that one of the first things that spinal cord patients with spinal cord injuries, one of the first things they ask often is not whether they will be able to walk again, but whether they will be able to have sex, if they will be able to feel pleasure. And a lot of the anxieties and worries in connection to the area of sex, pleasure, sexual well-being, intimacy. And this is something that is incredibly hard to talk about, but something that the hospital takes very serious and have sexologists working there to guide people and help people through. So in the project I was involved in, we were designing a starting kit for exploration of what feels good. What are different feelings on the body that feels good? And we developed it with a lot of different material, textiles, wood, bioplastics, metals. We started developing different objects that people could use on their body to feel, to explore the sensations. Because after being in a very traumatic bodily transitions, the sensations of the body will change. So this is sort of like a new open-ended way of bringing awareness to the body of sexual well-being in the area here of yeah, people with spinal cord injuries in a playful way, in a non-prescriptive way as well. So there was we did different objects that could curiously be used in various playful ways. Some analog, some more interactive, where we played around with how would you hold it, how would you place it, how would you activate it and control the vibration, for instance. Um, and then this was all done in collaboration with a master student, Tamara Friedenberger, and also in collaboration with the health experts at Sunus, the doctors and the physiotherapists and the sexologists working there. So we had some session where feedback sessions of these technologies. So this with the second project, closing up on that, I have this reflective question, which is how do we create liberatory spaces of care? And again, this is a question for reflection, thinking about sensitive or taboo areas of health, such as sexual well-being. How do we create liberatory spaces where we can care for this, not as an individual issue, but something that is talked about in the open, engaged with across from all the different perspectives of, for instance, different healthcare practitioners. So the last strategy that I want to present and highlight is this around ecology. How can we situate human health in ecology through a form of relating? And this strategy is really inspired by ecofeminism and feminist posthumanism. And this is where I went. Um, much of my recent work has been going in this direction of ecology and thinking not only about the human body, but thinking about the way that our human health is extremely intricately related to the health of our earth, right? Of Mother Earth. So how can we think of our health and situate our health in relation to the earth? In the project I present here is the project Biomenstrual, which I did together with Nadia Campo-Wojtok, a friend and long-term collaborator. And we started with the sort of like prompting question of all the waste that comes with menstrual hygiene. So this is a picture of plastic tampon applicators that have been washed up on a beach. So we're thinking of plastic pollution and health and menstrual health. But we're also in this project thinking of the nutrients that are present in menstrual blood. Nutrients that are actually the same kind of nutrients that are used in fertilizers that you can use and buy in the supermarket. Um, so in the project, we imagine this kind of life cycle or this cyclical development of of gathering one's own material for creating bio-based and biodegradable menstrual pads. So after gathering and making these menstrual pads out of bio-based materials, you would use them, you would bleed on these products. And after bleeding on them, you would burying the pads because they are biodegradable, you would burying them together with the menstrual fluids into soil. And in that way, your bodily waste and the waste that you use of your product sort of comes back into the soil and becomes part of this uh, cyclical um, product cycle where it grows into something new. So these we spend a lot of time to try to like materially explore these bio-based materials. Gluten, for instance, gluten is something that is being used to develop sponges in care products, both which is it's a very interesting research direction that is being explored. So the gluten we used, sphagnum moss, is a species of moss that I could talk about for hours. But for now, I'll just say it's a species of moss that has the qualities of being super absorbent and of being antiseptic. And it has a long history by indigenous communities and Sami uh, communities to be used in diapers, for instance, or in menstrual pads to soak up fluids. Then we explored bioplastics and we explored incorporating seeds and a pH indicator fluid made out of red cabbage into the sheets. And we created these pads to visualize how would they look like and test them out. How would they actually absorb fluids? And then we created these slides to these collages to show how this area of human health, menstrual health, becomes part of the modern human worlds that we are in, that we are relating with, such as small micro animals like the tardigrade, or worms and soils, like worms that lives in soils and the plants. So that was the third project, and with this I prompt the question of how do we nurture health beyond the human? That was the final question of reflection for you. And to summarize, these were the strategies that I sort of want to highlight, and that I thought that has been strategies that I've tried to like carry out and live out in my research practice the last 3, 4, 5 years, of creating embodiment and body literacy through curiosity, of nurturing a community of care through gathering, and of situating human health in ecology through relating. So I hope these strategies are something that maybe provoke you or resonate with you, or something that make you think of a new way we can develop femtech products and services. I added this slide, but I realize I'm slightly over time, so I'm not going to go into details with this, but these are just keywords for how do you do this in practice. Keywords that are incredibly important if you want to cultivate a space, a creative space where you can do feminist design of femtech. And with that, I want to actually end the presentation here. It was a little longer than I expected, but I want to thank you for listening and for people adding comments into the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie-Louise. It was a great presentation, really, in some cases mind-blowing on a situation. I said it before, I'm a male, being 50s, white. I think a lot of these perspectives, and a nurse, so I come from the professionals, and on the question, like the last one, the reflection on, or the next, the fourth one on how can we make space for these questions. I think a lot of people working in the healthcare setting is not really used to bringing these kind of questions to the table with the patients, or even between the professionals. So I think do you have any examples on that for like a first question, and then I will let everyone else in, where you have seen examples of doing that, more of that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, my whole design practice, the reason why I started going into this uh, area of design of women's health in the first place was because I experienced the taboo and the stigma myself. And I experienced it in my private life, and I experienced it in my design education. As a young student, I wanted to design for menstrual health, and my professors were like, they didn't know what to say, honestly. And it was a barrier for me already back then to be able to design for this. And of course, if people meet that kind of barrier in educations, in private life, in healthcare, you also meet it later. You meet it in a design agency. You meet it in when if you want to start a company and you need to have investment. If people can't talk about these issues, there's never going to be made any the important services and products for these health topics, right? So a lot of my work is really trying to find ways that we can, I mean, yeah, ways we can talk about these topics, spaces we can talk about the topics, different techniques of doing that. I'm myself do a lot of workshops, create a space where we have compassionate and open conversations about it. And for me, I try to bring it close to the body. So we don't just talk about it, but we sort of like bring our body into that space. And I try using the quality of design that has to do with making. And that's what I find often, that through making, through externalizing, through creating some kind of boundary objects, it's a way of limiting some of the taboos or the hesitance to talk about things. So if we can go beyond just like language, which has a lot of like lack of words or embarrassment, if we can bring in the body, if we can work with materials, that's the strategy for me, at least. And it connects very well with this a designerly practice. So at Sunos, where I collaborated with sexologists there, they talked a lot about the difficulty they have experienced in bringing sexual health into the treatment. And I was so amazed to see the work by the sexologist at the hospital, how they have paved the way for bringing sexual health into rehabilitation. It's incredible. And it is from very, very simple things like putting posters on the wall that says, come and talk about sex. That is a poster like that on a wall at the hospital has made people furious, made people angry. That's not important. Why do we spend our time on that? And that's the sexologist doing that just to put it on, like, just to show this is a key area of people's life. And this is a concern they have. And we need to give people the support in the rehabilitation process to talk about it, to explore it. So that was a fantastic, just a great example, putting posters, and then they had cafes, sex cafes, where weekly people could come if they wanted to just discuss in an open forum about their about sexual health and well-being. So that was a way of that I saw in practice at the hospital, that was done in a brilliant way. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you for that question. Is there anyone else want to bring a question to this? We have a lot of time left, I think, for questions.
Yeah, we have a question in the
You.
in the chat from
Yeah,
Kian.
yeah. Would you like to raise the questions? Ask it yourself, or shall we read it?
Oh, sure. I can ask. So, from your experience in research and working at a startup, because I know if you work at a startup, there's some sort of requirement for like achieving UN sustainability mission. You have to have that goal in your business plan. And how do you see the relation between ecology strategy that in feminist design and the UN sustainability mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's definitely it's a difficult question. I'm not sure exactly how to answer it, but I will bring it back to, I guess, my own research journey, where I I was involved in health designing for health for many years before I sort of started thinking of how human health relate to ecology and sustainability. And I think that's a case for many people who come from the health domain, that the first priority is human health. And in many ways that we are designing health care, it comes at the expense of other species' health and the health of the world. So we want in all possibly ways improve human health. And that, for instance, creates a lot of plastic pollution, right? So it's for me, it's not a question of like creating a hierarchy between human health, animal health, or environmental health, but to try to see this as a ecology. And the One Health framework is very helpful for that, to start talking about the interdependencies of the health of the human, animals, and the environment. And I know that there's a lot of sort of other frameworks, right? Like the UN sustainability missions, the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals. I think those are are great, honestly. I think some other people knows so much about them, and I see them being implemented in various ways in research and design and practice. Often I've experienced that it's something that people just need to tick off, or it becomes a little bit like a like check off, or like a tick box, like yeah, we answer to this UN Sustainable Development Goal, but because you have to, But I don't all it's hard to like to know really, but I think we need to have a better understanding of like the more like the interdependencies of our health, and being really detailed and more conscious about it. So I don't have a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is great. I mean, thank you so much.
Yes.
As you said, maybe this is not like UN sustainability goals are not to be checked off. They should be, as you suggested in the beginning, ecology strategy. We should have the whole ecosystem considered from the beginning when we start to do the research and design for a solution or for a given problem.
Yes,
Thank you so
exactly.
much for the inspiration. It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yes.
Jan.
Thank you.
Fergus, please.
Thanks, Jonas. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. A lot to take in and reflect back. I wanted to ask your advice really about identity within this, because I sort of think facilitating these sorts of conversations or running workshops where people can feel safe to be vulnerable and talk about these sorts of sensitive or taboo topics. And I don't mean to single Jonas out, but I think Jonas himself did what I feel a similar compulsion to do, particularly talking in this forum, following this topic of positioning myself as somebody who knows nothing about this, and yet, still being the white man who's quite comfortable to talk. But I just wondered how we can transcend those sorts of identities, or how much we need to give space for people to own those identities and position themselves. But then also it strikes me we have to transcend them pretty quickly, because otherwise we just get into these things of being exclusionary or reinforcing some of these things that what on earth is a man doing talking in a seminar about menstruation, for example, or whatever the someone who doesn't menstruate talking in a seminar about menstruation. So I just wondered if you had any advice thinking around how you facilitate some of these conversations that you can navigate the kind of identity question and whether you do need to spend time on it and accept it, or whether it is about trying to transcend that and decontaining the kind of identity question, allowing people to step out of those sorts of containers
Mm,
for themselves.
yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you so much. Um, I find that it's important to be very deliberate on when you do what, and have a constantly reflexivity around your own positionality, definitely, and what you as a designer uh, and person or a participant in a workshop brings into the room. So I find that having a very have space for positionality is really important, and a reflexivity around that. So that's why, but at a certain at you should be conscious on when you do it and why. So I like doing that in workshops, but without um, making it unnecessary. How do you say that? Not making it mandatory, because people don't come to a room with the same level of safety or vulnerability, because people come with different privileges and oppressions into a room. So you cannot also make it like a mandatory thing to, for instance, tell your, let's say, pronouns. But it's something that I try to model when I do a presentation or go into a workshop, to, for instance, say my pronouns. Or if I do a workshop around menstruating, say, yes, my lived experience of menstruating. And then when I do, for instance, workshops, I decide, I reflect a lot around who should be part of this workshop. Should it be people who menstruate themselves or not? And also, what kind of language do we then use for this? So that is, for instance, if you talk about menstruating, maybe it's not even menstruating you should use, but bleeding. Bleeding is a word for monthly bleeding that is more trans inclusive. Or if we talk about breastfeeding, maybe you should say chest feeding. So being very careful with your vocabulary and how you allow people to bring their identities in, and think about the spaces where you do what, is really important. And I think if you think of like designerly practice, yeah, it could be workshop presentations with if you're engaged with clients, or um, if you need to raise money or funding, you need to find your strategies for when you do what and with whom you talk to in which ways. Um, so it's something that I continuously try to learn and get better
Mm,
at, and
mm,
figure out the right way of navigating. And yeah.
mm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Kian also, but I think we will end up with the question here also. If Elena wrote a question on if you wonder if you think there are many cases where we need to design for men, for women benefits. If you see the next question, or Elena, would you like to kind of add something to that?
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering that because it came to my mind the example of contraceptives and hormonal contraceptives, that women have a lot of options, but I feel like we have the pressure of that, and there is not that much development in the men's side. So, is there any cases where we can design for men to support women's body?
Yes. 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 I think definitely, absolutely. And I think that's why, like, definitely, like the area of contraceptive.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of work around, like, for instance, menstrual cycles apps that is often directed towards a female user. right? Where there's so much like it's the same with contraceptives that has been given lots to women throughout history. You see the same with the menstrual cycle trackers that are then it's again it's like a perpetuating of the labor and yeah, the labor and the responsibility that is built into the apps these days, right?
Mhm.
So in those cases, there's been, for instance, been quite a lot of work to think about can we create interactions where a partner can be part of that? So natural cycles is an interesting example. How do you design natural cycles? The taking a temperature every morning. How do you include a partner if you're in a heterosexual relation where you can get pregnant? How do you include a partner in that practice of taking a temperature, for instance? But I think like yeah, if there are like thinking of ways of contraceptive where it can be for men contraceptive, definitely, definitely. I would love to see much more of that. Definitely, so much. The
Me
same,
too.
the same if you think of like there's more technologies being designed for safety of women or perhaps safety of trans people. That's another, like, how do we shift from designing like only the safety for the people who are being violated and shift it to the violators? How do we design
Yeah.
for their behavior change, you know? I think that's a really great, an amazing question you're raising because that's also the thing. Yeah, if we think of all these things or the services or products that should be designed for people with female bodies, then if we only think of them as individual beings who should take care of all these things, it's just the added labor, it's just the added responsibility. So that's why I also think of like try to move it into a social space, a contextual space, a cultural space, uh, not as issues that people have, but yeah, something that is related, interdependent on many other beings. So that's thank you so much for that question.